Chapter 21. He led us to a grove of trees. There he flung himself down and told me to do the same. That done, he called for a sack. He rummaged in it, producing more bread, which he tore and gave me half. When we had been silent for a while, I, still brooding over my unhappy fate, he said, "I don't think you care for me." "I have no choice," I said. "Would you like one?" "God's will be done," I said. He shrugged and said, "You might not believe it, but I was fated to be a priest in the city of York, that's far to the north." I looked at him and knew. Father Cornell was the only priest I had ever known. This huge man could not have been more different. "It seems my father grew weary of me," Bear continued. "Said I caused too much trouble and ate too much. In truth," he added with sudden bitterness, "I suspect he offered me to God to fulfill a pledge he'd made in exchange for some profitable trade. Though I ask you, what kind of man would exchange a boy for a sack of wool?" His question made me think upon my father. I tried to imagine what kind of man he might have been if he had lived, and if he would have done such a thing with me. "A punctilious man, my father," Bear went on. "He paid my fees in full, gave me his hasty blessing, and walked away. I never saw him more. Willy-nilly, I was enrolled in the Benedictine Abbey to be a monk, 12 years of age, younger than you, and already in robes. An alkalite." "Did you become a monk?" I said. "I was at the Abbey for 7 years. I learned how to pray, how to be silent. I learned to read Latin, French, even English. There's that. It keeps me from the gallows." "Why?" I said, for in spite of myself, I found myself interested in his story. "The law. If you can read, you're treated as a priest. Common law does not allow priests to be hanged." "But shortly before I took my final vows," he continued, "when on some errand for my fat and greasy abbot, I came upon a group of mummers in a square close to the York Minster. Their music, tricks, and most of all their laughter beguiled me. Perhaps it was the devil himself who took a liking to my soul. In any case, I ran off, like you," he added with a laugh. "But how could you abandon God?" I said. "Had he not abandoned me?" "It was your father, not God, who left you," I said. I must have surprised him with my words, for he grew silent, and when he spoke again it was with less bravado. "For 10 years I travelled with those people," he said. "They became my dearest friends. We went all about the kingdom. Mind you, we lived only a tad beyond beggary. But my companions taught me better languages, the language of song, of hand, of foot, and most of all, of laughter." "Can you still be hanged, then?" "Is that your hope?" he laughed. "Not as long as I can read. But I did the next best thing. I went off to be a soldier." "And abandoned your new friends?" I said. "Not abandoned, disbanded. Only St. Anthony knows where they went. Some wandered off, others lost their lives to brawls, jails, duels, or sickness. Some were lost to marriage. The wandering life, the mummer's life, is a fragile one at best." He shrugged. "In any case, I'd rather be alone." "Then why—" I faltered. "Why what? Speak out." "Well, then why do you need me?" I said. In response, he reached into his sack and pulled out the leather balls again. As before, he tossed them round and round so that they seemed to float about his hands. "Here," he said, holding out the balls to me. "Let me see how skilled you are." "Me? Of course you. I can't do such things. Saint Crispin," he balked, "stand before me." Reluctantly, I took my place before him. "Now, pay attention," he said. Beginning with one ball, he demonstrated how to toss it back and forth between his hands. He told me to do the same. I did so, clumsily at first, but under his insistent commands, I began to grasp his method. "There now," Bear said. "Watch this." He took up a second ball, and along with the first began to throw it back and forth. "Do that," he said. Tossing 2 balls between my hands was quite another matter. I could barely manage it. "Again," he shouted, "and again." When I failed, he was always severe, insisting I try over and over again. But at last, the balls began to fly for me. After sitting back and watching me intently with his shrewd eyes, he said, "Enough. We need to move on. You'll practice more. You'll add more balls as you go. Music, too. And I vow by the joy of Christ you will learn it well." "But why?" I said. "You shall see." We continued along the muddy road. This time as we went, Bear sang the top of his voice. Loudly sings the cuckoo, grows the seed, and blooms the meadow. Comes the spring, the woods do sing. Sing cuckoo, now sing cuckoo. Sing cuckoo, now sing cuckoo. Then from his sack he took out a music pipe. A recorder, he called it, and began to play the same melody, after which he sang the verse again. Sing, he commanded. I don't know how. Crispin, if I bid you to sing, you'll sing, he said. Haltingly, I tried. Louder! I complied. As we went along, I was convinced more than ever that Bear was mad. Chapter 22. Toward early evening, Bear found a secluded spot some paces off the road. There he ordered me to stand against a tree. I hesitated. Do as I say, he said. When I did, he pulled the twist of rope from his sack and, to my alarm, proceeded to tie my hands behind the tree. What are you doing? I cried, seeing this as confirmation of his madness. I need to fetch us some food, he said, pulling the knot tight. You'll only interfere, and I don't want you running off. But I swore I wouldn't, I said. I beg you, don't leave me here. Pah, he mocked. As God in heaven knows, both wheat and trust take a full season to grow. Without another word, he went off, leaving me alone. More than once I tested the knot, determined that despite my vow, I'd run off. But no matter how hard I tried, I could not get loose. Instead, my arms grew numb. How long he was gone, I don't know. Enough to fill my heart with more misery and make me swear violent oaths at him. I even screamed for help, though I knew help would never come. But when I caught sight of the sack he had left behind, I told myself he was bound to return, if not for me, for it. Sure enough, he did. What's more, a large, fat rabbit dangled from his hands. There, St. Crispin, he said when he came into view, a great grin on his red-bearded face. Now you can see that for all good or ill, I always keep my word. He untied me, faint from standing so long, my arms aching from being tied. I immediately sat down. Do you know the penalty for poaching? He said as he worked his dagger skillfully to skin the rabbit. I was so angry I only shook my head. To feed us, I've put both our lives in jeopardy, he said. That's the kind of freedom that exists in this kingdom. With flint, steel, and tinder, he made a fire, which he told me to stoke with bits of wood. Then he took up the rabbit, spit at it, and soon it had it roasting. Do you like meat? He said, seeing me with my mouth agape. I've only eaten it a few times, I confessed. A few times? He laughed uproariously. Ah, Crispin, the blessed saints were kind when they guided you to me. For my part, I love meat. When he proclaimed the rabbit cooked, he tore it apart, gave me some. As I shoved the bits into my mouth with my hands, I admitted to myself it was the best food I had ever eaten. My resolve to flee abated, somewhat. Later, when we had our fill, more meat than I had consumed at one time in my entire life, and the embers of the fire had burned low, Bear told me to lie down on the far side as he wished to speak to me. What madness, I wondered, would he reveal to me now? It had grown dark. The only light was our little fire. A breeze had sprung, which caused the flames to dance. Bear's red beard seemed to glitter in the firelight, so that his face, despite the dark, was equal to any sun. His bald head gleamed like a moon. Indeed, he was big enough to fill the entire sky. Then he began to speak of his many adventures, his riotous life, the marvels he had seen, the scrapes he had escaped, his fortunes, good and bad. Never had I heard such tales. It was a world and a life, a way of being, utterly unknown to me. What's more, everything he talked about was stitched with laughter. It was as if life itself were a jest. Except every now and then he'd cry out with an awful anger at what he called the injustices of the world. Then he spoke of his soldiering days, fighting alongside the Black Prince in Gascony and Brittany. Our master had been fighting in France for so long, I said. I had never seen him. What's his name? Lord Furnival. Furnival, Bear said. You'll be pleased to know his first home is in Great Wexley, where we're bound. I said, What manner of man is he? Bear shrugged. I saw him too much. A great landowner, and arrogant. What he lacked in fighting skills he made up for in bragging, drinking, and killing in that order. But he's a noble knight, he snorted. Do you think that makes him less mortal? By God's everlasting bones, Crispin, war is where the Christian is truly tested. Alas, your Lord Furnival was not one to inspire faith. If there were looting and cruelty to be done, he did more than his share. With the falcon's eyes for ransom. As for those prisoners who would yield nothing, Bear waved his hand dismissively, doomed. Regarding his fondness for women, I shan't say. But you may believe me, as Jesus shall be our judge, your Lord Furnival shall have much to answer for. His steward is cruel, I said. Tuh, a suitable pair, Bear said. And what village is that? Stromford, I said before I could catch myself. When he lapsed into silence, I thought of what Bear said about Lord Furnival. It made me uneasy, thinking it might have been a mistake to reveal my connection and where I had come from. There would be danger if Bear was truly mad and we were going there. And yet he seemed to know so much, more than any man I had ever met. How, I asked myself, would he consider me when he knew more of what I was? The fire smoldered, a breeze blew, a bird whistled in the dark. My uneasiness had just begun to subside when Bear said, Now, Crispin, it's time I learned the truth of you.